Hi everyone, I'm Stuart Radford, ECD of Super Union. I'm here with Adam Barker, BBC Two Channel Executive, and Susan Ayton, Creative Director, BBC Creative. We're delighted to be here and have this opportunity to talk through the BBC Two project. I think I can safely say that it's a project that's really close to our hearts. We lived and breathed this project for almost a year. So it's a joy to be here and have this opportunity. It's obviously an extremely important project for the BBC. It's the first time that BBC Two had rebranded in 27 years. And in the next 30 minutes, we're going to try and talk you through as much of that process as we possibly can. We'll be passing the baton between us. But before we get into that, we thought we would not be too presumptuous. So we wanted to share with you what you would see if you watched BBC Two on television today. So this is an edited version of a junction structure, which is essentially the space between TV shows. Here it is.
Now on BBC Two, it's time for... Sorry, I am so taking that thing home with me as a pet. While I try and catch it, you watch this.
We're flying over Lebanon.
Discover the Mediterranean you'd never expect with Simon Reeve. Starts tonight at 8 on BBC Two.
The heartbreak of this place. Love it and hate it like no place on earth.
BBC Two presents a new three-part drama, Death and Nightingales, coming soon to BBC Two.
And it is going to be delicious.
Join me on Nadia's British food adventure on BBC Two.
Thank you. So that's what BBC Two looks like today, but let's flash back just for a second to look at what it looked like for the previous 25 years or so. Many of you may recognize this ident, which in its way was, a real kind of icon of its times, designed in the 1990s by Lambinaire, something that we felt very kind of fond of as a channel and that many of our viewers felt very passionate about. But we've been living with it for a long time. The challenge for us really was to take this opportunity to kind of redesign all the packaging around the channel. And we only get to do that once in a generation, so it's a really big kind of deal for us, and it's a really big deal for the guys who do it. And also it came at a time when we were trying to kind of rethink some of the programming on BBC Two. So if you look at the range of content here, Louis Theroux, Peaky Blinders, The MASH Report, we've got kind of content that we're trying to kind of reach out to a younger audience with, and to kind of, make sure that this feels like a vivid and contemporary modern television channel. With the existing idents, it didn't really feel like that. So the other thing we wanted to achieve with the new on-screen identity was to kind of find a way to show how modern and lively we are with our programming, and that was the kind of big creative challenge that we gave to these guys.
BBC Creative is the in-house agency for the BBC. We've been around for about 3 years with the remit to make world-class creative for the world's best broadcaster. So to get this brief was very exciting, and we absolutely wanted to do something ambitious and bold. We didn't want to change the DNA of BBC Two, but just make it the most audacious version of itself. We also knew we wanted to collaborate. BBC Creative likes to collaborate, and collaboration is sort of part of our culture. If you don't know, that's Miley Cyrus with the flaming lips doing their whack genius collaboration. Collaboration is important creatively because it takes you to an unsafe area, and unsafe is really where you want to be. To be safe nowadays is to be the most unsafe. It is the most unsafe thing you can do. I think the brief was very simple. We were very clear about our vision of BBC Two, about our creative ambition for BBC Two, and the idea that we wanted the audience to completely reappraise BBC Two, particularly the younger audience. And we were absolutely clear that we wanted to champion creativity, which is what BBC Two does as a channel.
As you can imagine, we were extremely excited about the project. One, collaborating with BBC was a new thing for us, so pretty excited about that. But the creative ambition for the project really resonated. We then obviously started to work together, and the collaborative process kicked in very, very quickly. And essentially, for almost a year, we had ourselves 2 homes. Our Super Union room that we affectionately call the bunker, as modelled by Eric, our designer, was a sort of confidential room that we worked from for Super Union, and then the other sort of 50% of the time we were at BBC. So the process was extremely collaborative, and just to give you some context on that, we were meeting with the BBC 3 times a week, once with BBC Creative, BBC Marketing, and also BBC Two's controller and his team. So it was a fairly intense process. And with regards to the kind of creative process there, I guess initially we just explored various different narratives around how we might position BBC Two and looked at some of the visual language and some of the look and feel that might support that. And then that took us on, obviously, to the concept stage. I think what was really interesting about this process for us, we talked a lot about collaboration before we started working together. I don't think we fully understood how collaborative that collaborative process was going to be. So again, to give you some, I guess, indication of that, by the nature of how we work as designers, we're control freaks, and we like to have that space to work things out before we share it with our clients. Suddenly, we weren't in that space at all, and we were sharing work very, very fluidly, very, very rapidly. So that was slightly uncomfortable at the beginning, but was a great process to go through and got some good results relatively swiftly. So we presented a number of different concepts, or developed a number of different concepts together. Haven't got time, obviously, to share all of those with you today, but we're going to share with the one that resonated. And essentially, this concept initially started out as this idea of ever-changing. BBC Two's content is very broad and diverse. And to reflect that ever-changing schedule, we were going to create a visual identity system that in of itself continually changed and morphed. So this is one of the kind of early sort of mood board visual representations of this idea. And it was, we say, everything was going to morph and change fluidly. So the idea being that in a junction structure, we would remove hard cuts, and we would see graphics and content morph together. This really resonated with BBC Two almost as much as this bit of visual reference here, affectionately known as the marshmallow image, is almost single-handedly responsible for this approach, really. It really resonated with BBC Two Marketing. They really felt it had an evocative, mood-like quality to it. So that then led to this kind of second iteration and development of this concept. And rather than it just being about morphing and changing, it then became about an approach that morphs and changes to reflect the different moods of the various different bits of content.
I mean, the thing for us is that having a brief that says ever-changing, that's quite a scary concept for a kind of editorial television channel. So if you came in and pitched that as a program idea, you'd probably get quite short shrift. But the sheer kind of visual beauty of what was being shown to us here, I think, was the thing that really captured us and persuaded us.
Even our slightly dodgy visuals. So the idea being that we'd have these morphing animations. At some point, we'd create a 2. So, for example, this is like a sinister mood for Peaky Blinders. And the idea being there'd be a palette of various different moods for various different bits of content. So you might have something a bit more upbeat for Gardener's World, and you might have something a little bit more fast-paced, maybe a sort of dynamic mood for something like Top Gear. And this looks pretty technical, but I think it's actually where the idea starts to get pretty ambitious. So if you think about how an ident works normally, that's quite often at the end of the junction structure or ad break, and it will probably last for about 10 seconds, and the voiceover would introduce the following TV show. We felt that with this idea, to really capture the spirit of this idea, we could essentially take that junction structure and turn that into one extended long ident that morphs and changes, reflecting the various different program content that has been promoted during the course of it. So again, this really goes back to what I said initially, that we would remove hard cuts and you would just get this continuous journey through the junction structure. Turns out removing hard cuts isn't actually as easy as you might think.
No. So we were incredibly excited about the idea of it being a borderless and fluid junction, and even that maybe you never saw the same junction twice. But we actually had no idea at all about how we were going to do that.
And we didn't really care. I mean,
we didn't tell them either.
we were not across any of the practicalities at this point. We just approved the concept and then went, OK,
Yeah.
you guys figure it out.
So our first initial thought was that we would do a sort of live algorithm, that essentially we'd have a piece of software that would understand the mood of the content, then be able to create its own mood from that mood, and then move the junction through to playful. So if we have Newsnight, which is serious, then our bit of software would be able to go from that serious to playful. The only problem with that is that with software, you need hardware. And for the BBC, it's not just London. You have to do hardware for across the whole of the UK, all the nations and regions. And also being the BBC, the hardware had to have backup hardware, so that was double the amount. So that proved to be a no-go. Then we thought we'd go and see the play-out people. And play-out are the people that put everything on air, on time, in the right order. It's 24/7, and they work live, and it's pretty intense and high-pressured. But we kind of thought that they might enjoy a bit of change and do a bit of live vision mixing for us and VJ the moods and choose them themselves. They weren't at all keen. And that's sort of what we imagined they might do. And then we kind of thought we need to be a bit more self-sufficient here. So we thought we'd try out an animation morph, which would basically create more animations that would take us from one mood to the next. So we would create every permutation there is for our animations. At this point, there was 15. And every permutation from one mood to the next would create something like 270 new bits of animation. It's taken us almost a year to do 15. So the idea of doing 270 extra pieces would, well, we wouldn't even be here now.
We'd have nervous breakdowns.
Yeah. So we had to go somewhere pretty simple.
So as you can see, almost from that, as you see those various different attempts, we started to get more and more sort of simple-ish as we were going through those. But I guess with every attempt, we got a clearer understanding of play-out and that system. And what became clear, despite the kind of open-mindedness of BBC and the ambition there to potentially change play-out, the realities of actually changing play-out were a bloody nightmare. So it was about, as Susan said, it's about trying to find a really simple solution. And interestingly, that came in something that we were trying to avoid, which is the hard cut. Actually, ironically, we embraced the hard cut to find the solution. And that solution was really going to be in this idea of having a match cut moment that we would hard cut on. So the animations would morph, form a precise two-curve shape, and on that exact moment, they would match cut, and we would cut from one animation into another. So this is a very bad visual, so don't judge us, but hopefully we'll convey the idea. That essentially you would just get this moment where these two match cuts are perfectly aligned and meet, and that becomes the visual glue that essentially takes you from one mood into another. So that's how we solved it. A very, very simple solution in the end. And I guess this is about halfway through the process, so probably about 5 months in.
At least 5.
We got to this sort of stage. So at which point, nothing had moved. We then started to work with Future Deluxe, who really then started to explore various different parts of this. So obviously started with the 2 curve itself and how we might start to form that shape, the depth of that, the movement, so all sorts of experiments. Obviously there's one fundamental thing with this, which is the shape of the 2 curve. And for us, I think we thought that was a bit of a no-brainer, but it's obviously quite a big deal to potentially go from a 2 to a curve shape.
Yeah, so once in a generation you get a chance to rebrand, where's our 2 gone? But I think we were really on this journey at this point, and I think the visual elegance of that kind of curve really appealed to us. And what we were being asked to do was embrace the feel and the mood and the overall visual vibe as our kind of brand identity, as it were, and not worry too much about that numeric 2. That was quite a kind of moment, really, because that numeric 2, if you work on BBC 2, that runs through you a bit like a stick of rock. But I think we were persuaded and excited by the overall concept enough to kind of just go with it and not worry about what would happen to the 2.
So from that point, we then obviously carried on our work with Future Deluxe. Again, some more bits of exploration here. So all of these were just tests. None of these actually sort of made it through. But were really giving us a real understanding about the type of movement that we could use, the depth of the animation, the types of textures that were working, and ultimately ensuring that that 2 curve match cut moment actually worked. And timing was super important in this, and this is, again, one of the very, very first tests where we started to see the animations over moving image. So you can see here in a second, so we were just creating this technique and these almost transitions where you see the texture come in on and fill the screen. And you can see from this, it's almost painfully slow. So we were continually refining the actual timings. So we did a lot of work with, as I say, with Future Deluxe. That got us to a point where we had a clear understanding of what it was going to take with regards to all of the timings and the depths of these various different textures. So then we could brief and work with other animators and collaborators to produce the final animations. Before we go into that process, there's a short little 2-minute interlude. We thought we'd just share with you a selection of some of those final animations, and then we'll talk about the actual collaboration process behind those.
So in order to kind of implement this overall kind of mood strategy, we had to find a way of kind of breaking down all the different types of programs on BBC Two and putting them into kind of rough categories so that the animators and the visual guys kind of knew what were the different flavors and tones that we were trying to go for. So a very heroic person at the BBC, spent a very long time going through all the hundreds of hours of programs on BBC Two, and breaking them down into these kind of categories. Some of these words are a bit kind of odd and arbitrary, but they give you a sense of kind of flavor and where different idents will work with different kinds of programs. This being a creative business, obviously, not everyone does what they're asked to the whole time, so we generated a lot of idents for comedy, and comedy department's immediate response was, why do we have to have those? And similarly, Newsnight had interesting and strong views on what they were given as their ident. But this is the basic plan that allowed the generation of 25 different idents to cover the range of output across BBC Two.
So just when we thought hard work was all over, we then obviously had to start to formulate essentially 25 different briefs for 25 different moods. And the way in which we went about this was to essentially create a brief, a starting point that gave each of the collaborators a clear vision and an idea, essentially, that they could either potentially just execute or look at reinterpreting and building on. So the way in which we approached this was to lock Eric into the bunker for a couple of weeks, find some visual reference for us. Again, interesting here, what we didn't want to do is look really at anything that had been done before from a moving image point of view. So we were just using sort of static visual reference to build up these various different mood briefs. What you're looking at here is a selection of some of the mood briefs. Each sort of page is a mood brief. And I guess there were two things that was important in terms of the direction that they gave our collaborators. And that really is probably best demonstrated if I start talking about one particular mood. So this is pleasurable escapist. The idea that this mood almost sort of like takes you on a bit of a journey. So the two things were that we give a really clear kind of aesthetic guide in terms of the direction we wanted to go. But as important, possibly more important, was that we had a vision for the narrative. So what sort of story is it we're going to tell during the course of the animation? And we thought this was something really interesting about the notion of going on a bit of a journey through a sandstone sort of cave structure and almost using light at the end of the cave to play a role in that story. So this is essentially the brief that we gave Future Deluxe. This is actually the first final mood that we created. So off the back of this brief, they then obviously started exploring various different ways in which to approach it. This is a first bit of moving image test that we received from them, which we got very excited about, thought it was lovely, thought there was something really nice in terms of that movement of the cave walls, and really liked the role of light in this. But we felt that there's an opportunity maybe to be slightly more fluid with those walls. So we worked with Future Deluxe on that, and they came back with this. This is just a wireframe, but you can start to see there's much more fluidity in those walls. The two curve itself, you'll notice that the two curve, there's probably a bit of detail here, but it's the sort of thing that excites us. The two curve is very, very mechanical in terms of that hard edge. So we wanted something a little bit more organic. So that led to this. Again, it's a wireframe, but it's just added some color into it. But again, it gives you an indication there of a more organic kind of two-curve edge. And that led to the final animation, which looks like this. We'll talk about sound design a bit later on. So if I wasn't banging on about narratives to the team, I was banging on about timings. The timings are so important in terms of getting that match cut to work. You just needed enough time, dwell time, where there's very little movement on that two curve so that it became the focal point before you then cut on that and went into another animation. So, for example, even when you're just looking at his animation here, you actually only see the two curve for half that amount of time. So we spent a lot of time discussing and refining timings. But yeah, on to the next mood, which is something completely different.
So I've got Silly. So obviously we were doing a lot of high-end CGI and graphics, and Silly was an opportunity to work. Well, it's for Saturday morning TV, so we thought we'd do some live action on this, and we sent our squidgy mood board off to Aardman, and they came back with this. And we were totally sold. Probably once that music kicked in, everyone wanted it. So
if you want to get anything commissioned on BBC Two, that is the key.
That's the music.
Music like that. But obviously doing live action threw up a whole other world of problems, like this. We were discussing this morning that it actually looks like someone has thrown up. We had no control on it. The slime is wrong, the eyes are wrong. We couldn't get the match cut. Just everything was wrong, and it was a bit crap. So we went again to reshoot. We went down to Aardman. We redid the model so the 2 curve is more precise. We got the viscousness of the slime right, and we just shot it much more successfully. Here's a little bit in action.
That felt really nicely. That felt really nicely, and an eyeball landed on top as well.
Have you ever seen anybody take slime so seriously?
Yeah. And then we got the eyes, so we had to choose the right bit of film, and then they did the sort of puppeteering on the eyes, and they just brought that kind of Aardman magic to the mood. And this is how it ended up. There's a sort of sex tape version, which we had of this, which when it was a bit wrong, we had a full start with the music, but this is how it ended up. Still pretty squidgy.
So that's quite a good representation of the creative process we went through on the whole thing. I've got Gritty, which I've chosen partly just to kind of see how far we've come from that original numeric 2. It's obviously a kind of, quite an exciting visual kind of starting point, an Escher-like piece. We're looking for something here that's going to go with our kind of more gritty urban dramas and documentaries, but also something that's got a level of kind of visual inventiveness to it. This is an early iteration. And obviously, we're quite far into a kind of CGI type territory here with quite a strong kind of video game set of references as well. Is that going to work?
Should do.
Yeah, there we go. And when it came to the finished thing, for some reason, it made me think about the movie Angel Heart. So one tiny bit of credit I can claim on this is that if you listen to the soundtrack, there's clanking, which is like the elevator in that film that goes to hell. And at this point, Stuart told me off for art directing, so I'd learned to keep quiet after that. But anyway, here it is.
I don't know that you did.
No, I didn't.
So Adam actually gave some brilliant bits of art direction during the course of the work. At one point, I remember you saying to me about Escapist, and you were looking at the 2 curve, and you said, perhaps if we could just put something like 0.2 blur, Gaussian blur on that edge. Made me question my own ability to art direct. So on to something, again, completely different, is Offbeat. So this was quite an interesting challenge for us in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, I'd been sort of banging on about how important a narrative was. We really struggled with getting a concept for Offbeat, because as soon as we got a narrative that made sort of sense, it kind of undermined this offbeat, weird, sort of surreal mood that we were after. So I did that classic creative director thing and contradicted what I just said, and said, let's forget about a narrative. And then we started thinking about how we could do something unexpected, maybe with textures. Susan had a lot of love for fur, so we used fur as a sort of starting point. And then we started to think about what we could put with that would be unexpected and slightly bizarre and odd. Found this bit of visual reference with the fur and the snake. Thought we could dial that up. That led us to conversations around these tentacles and the suckers, and we thought that was really pretty interesting. And what I particularly liked about this is that up until this point, we hadn't done anything that interacted with the idea of the glass screen of the television. So the idea of having these suckers interacting with the other side of the screen kind of really, I thought, was very exciting. So anyway, so we briefed Mainframe for this, and this is the first test that they came back with. That got us very excited. Doesn't take much. And then they sent, at the same time, they sent over this, which I think is amazing in terms of they suddenly started to think about this animation as creating some sort of creature. And they turned the 2 curve into that creature, which is like brilliant. So we said, yeah, we love this. Can we just have some fur on it? To which they sent back this without any fur. But what again was just another bit of brilliant thinking in terms of rather than just having this creature walk on and off screen, it does this little pirouette. And as it does this little pirouette, it reforms that second 2 curve, as it does there, which is so lovely. We finally got to see some fur. And again, just thought there was a bit more of an opportunity maybe to play with this interaction of the screen. So if the fur's sitting flat against the screen, it should be squashed. So we fed that back to Mainframe, and they went, yep, we're already on it, and had this lovely bit of visual reference. And that finally led to this. It's a couple of things, well, 3 things I really like about this animation. One is there's a cheeky little nod back to the Furry 2 from the existing or previous Identity. There's also an uncanny visual resemblance with our designer, Eric, that's quite lovely. And the final thing on this is that there's a lovely sort of full circle back to the visual reference in that the sound designer recorded his cat for the sound design, which I think is kind of nice. So we've been super lucky to work with some amazing collaborators and animators from some big names through to some perhaps smaller independents. And I have to say, they've all been brilliant. Quite often we found ourselves almost in those sort of like final stages after they've been working on them for weeks of us suddenly going, can we have a little bit longer on that 2 curve, maybe an extra sort of 12 frames? An extra 12 frames is like an extra a week's worth of work that they probably had to do in about 2 days. And all of them were just so committed and dedicated to just doing a great job. They were absolutely superb. One chap in particular maybe needs a shout out.
So one of my personal favourites was Alex Baranowski to work with. I used to talk to him about 3 or 4 times a week on the phone, and he did the audio for all the moods. And what's interesting about Alex is that he comes really from a theatre background where he did audio for the theatre. And from doing that, he absolutely understood totally how to place the audience immediately and instantly into a particular world, and also to make that world very emotive. So he was of absolute joy, like all of them really, but I'll let him speak for himself.
The challenge with all these moods was musically and in the sound world, how we could connect them, but also how they could be very individual and work on their own and still be very much part of the family of BBC Two Idents. We created a chime sound, and the chimes was very different compared to each different mood. Maybe I'd use a triangle, maybe I'd use some little dingy bells, and combine that with a chord. So you can have these 2 notes that are played at the beginning of every different mood, depending on what the mood is doing. wanted to create little environments that would make you feel like you were part of this beautiful world. It's about finding something that's an air of familiarity but is completely new.
Just to say that Alex's brief was the same as all the other designers, which was to keep it abstract, but to have a touch of the familiarity about it.
So now comes to the moment of truth, which is when we decide to put these identities on air. I think one of the interesting things for us is that on a channel like BBC Two, you've got to make a judgment about how fast do you take the audience on a journey of change, as it were. And obviously, you know, we were incredibly excited about this, but at the same time, it was a huge change. And, you know, often at the BBC, changes are met by more negative than positive responses. We also had many constituencies looking at this. So obviously, you know, all the kind of creatives and professionals in the industry, our program makers, our on-screen talent, some of our bosses. You know, there were a lot of kind of eyes on this. And then after many months of work, the decision was taken, rather than go for some kind of soft launch or easy transition, we were just going to change everything at 6 o'clock in the morning, one Thursday morning, I think it was. And this is what it looked like on the day.
Above the calm water,
a convoy of narcotics is being taken for destruction.
Close to incredible wealth.
I take my flipping hat off to them, I really do.
And beyond the deep blue sea.
Oh my God! We're flying over Lebanon!
Discover the Mediterranean you'd never expect with Simon Reeves. Starts Sunday, 7th of October on BBC Two.
I'll have the crab to start with, and then I'm going to have the turtle.
Richard didn't even blink looking at the prices.
Well, that's because you're paying for it.
All right, that's right in talk.
A dinner party like no other. I'll get this. Coming soon on BBC Two.
Well, hey there. This is BBC Two, and we've got a cool, colourful new look. Iconic. Just like Britain's longest road, the A1, where a learner driver has been thrown a curveball in half an hour. It's eyes down first, though. We have got a book to read.
So it's not often your work gets compared to the A1, but, you know, take it where you can get it. Very conscious we've got, I think, 30 seconds left. So,
do it.
So we've got a world
Premiere?
exclusive for you, in that this project is not over yet. We are doing another 8 animations, and we've got one to share with you. When I say one, it's not entirely complete. It's only 17 seconds. But it's for the mood called Maverick. It's been done by Buck, and here it is. So, that's us. Thank you very much.